Good morning. The semi-annual meeting of the McGee Creek Authority will be in order. Welcome all of you from out of Oklahoma City to Oklahoma City. The first item on the agenda is the swearing in of some additional trustees.
There's none at this time.
There are none, okay? We'll get through this agenda quickly if we can just keep doing that on each one. We'll be at lunch before we know it. The next item is the approval of the minutes from the McGee from the September 26th meeting of the authority. We have a motion. And a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Are there comments, questions, additions, corrections? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Next one is under item 4, items for individual consideration, and the first one is the adoption of the budget for fiscal year 15. The materials on the budget are in the packets that are previously distributed, and if anybody has a question about them, we have people here to answer them. Are there any questions or comments? Does staff want to comment anything about them? Are there any changes this year from what we've done in the past?
The budget includes funding, should the trustees approve 3% adjustment to personnel, and $6.652 million as normal for payment of the debt service for the bond issue, pickup, a riding mower, and repair of 2 pumps in the budget.
Any comments from trustees? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Have a motion and a second to approve the resolution adopting the budget. Are there further questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Budget's approved. Next item is a resolution under item 4B is a resolution appropriating funds as they become available for the purchase of equipment as set out in the budget. The budget that we just approved. And the equipment you're talking about are, as you mentioned,
Correct.
things we need to keep it running. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve item 4B. Are there questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? 4B is approved. Next item is a resolution directing the general manager to request participants to make an election concerning the adequate costs for the fiscal year 2015. That's a standard resolution that's on every year at this meeting after we approve the budget.
Make a motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve item 4C. Are there questions or any need for any further explanation? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? 4C is approved. 4D, the resolution authorizing the general manager to utilize arbitrage services. Again, that's something we have to do every year. We have to have a calculation of the arbitrage to be sure we're not that we're not in violation of the Internal Revenue rules with regard to arbitrage. So this is a standard thing. It's on the agenda each March when we at this meeting. Have a motion? And a second? Second. Have a motion and a second to approve item 4D. I'm moving along fairly quickly. If anybody has a question or wants to discuss it, certainly I'm not trying to steamroll it. I mean, so if anybody has a question about it, we'll certainly feel free to ask. Hearing no questions, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? 4D is approved. Item 4E is a resolution ratifying the actions of the chairman in approving plans and specs with Downey Contracting for replacement of culverts at the pump station and the plant yard and so forth. It's authorization. That's authorization for the ratification of the work already that had to be done in the interim between this meeting and the last meeting. Any questions? Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Okay.
You're on.
I'm on.
There you
Okay, I'll speak louder. 4E is a resolution ratifying actions that have already been taken with regard to things that occurred between this meeting and the last meeting to make repairs, this is not unusual for a trust that only meets every 6 months. Certain things have to be done, so we don't have emergency meetings to do them within certain parameters. We try to keep the ball rolling, so that's what this is. It's $227,000 worth of work that was done on culverts and so forth that had to be done in the interim. So if anybody has any, $237,000, excuse me. Anybody that has a question, certainly feel free to ask. Hearing no questions, you want?
We're just going to let you know that we have our engineering staff here if you have any questions about the work.
Right. Actually, the speed with which I'm going through this is because I want to go get something to eat, and we're going to go really have a nice lunch here in a little bit. So I'm trying to make sure that everybody gets to eat. But if there are questions, certainly I don't want to. I'm embarrassed a little bit by how fast I'm going through stuff, and I don't mean to do it that way to the detriment of anybody. If anybody has a question or a concern, that's why this meeting's open, and we want to be sure that we ask all the questions or get them answered if anybody has one. Hearing no questions, we have a motion and a second to approve them. We don't. We have a motion and a second to approve the resolution under item 4E. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The next item is item 4F. It's a resolution, again, ratifying the actions of the chairman approving an amendment to payment of claims. Actually, it was a decrease of $841 for a project on the pumping plant yard. Other questions, comments? Do we have a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve item 4F.
Second.
Further questions? Hearing none. Voting, please. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 4G is a resolution establishing a policy to appoint the same engineering firms at Oklahoma City's Water Trust and Oklahoma City's Environmental Assistance Trust, have them serve as the engineer. It's really there's a synergy between all these organizations, and it makes a lot of sense to use the same engineer for all of them. So that's just establishing that as a policy, so we don't have to. We can revisit it at any time, but the idea is that we don't have to revisit it. We use the same engineering firm that handles all the other water stuff in Oklahoma City. Are there questions, or would staff want to make any kind of a further explanation of that?
The Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust, by trust indenture, has to have a trust engineer and appoints a trust engineer to do certain matters that have to be performed as a part of the bond indenture for the bonds. McGee Creek, same way. Oklahoma City Environmental Assistance Trust operates our solid waste trust, and the Water Wastewater Utilities Department operates the water, wastewater, and solid waste activities in that activities. So in our engineering division, Larry here from our engineering office will oversee the design of those activities that come as a result of this activity.
By using the same engineer, it just streamlines the process, is what that's about. Any comments? Voting, please. All in favor say aye. Aye. Oh, we don't have a motion.
I move to approve.
I really am hungry. We have a motion to approve and a second.
Second. All right.
Motion and a second to approve item 4G. Now voting, please. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4H. It's the loan approval. This is, again, another standard thing that has to happen at this meeting annually. It's the loan agreement between this trust and the Water Utilities Trust to pay the cost of the McGee Creek facilities. Okay.
When the original bonds were issued for the McGee Creek Authority to buy out the Federal Bureau of Reclamation contract for the construction of the facilities, in order for the McGee Creek Authority to get a lower interest rate and more preference in that, the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust agreed to do an agreement of support between the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust and the McGee Creek Authority. And then the bond issue, the revenue bond issue in December of 1992 was issued by the McGee Creek Authority. And there is also a provision in the amended trust indenture for the McGee Creek Authority for the member participants to share the water at McGee Creek based upon their utilization, and their utilization was backed up by the sale of water. And because you're building a long-term water supply, the sales of water will occur many years into the future. And so the backstop financing, because the bonds had to be paid every year for the debt service, was to rely upon that agreement of support between Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust and the McGee Creek Authority for the difference between the water sales and the financing. The McGee Creek Authority, before many of the members that are on the trust today, appointed a committee to look at all these requirements and determine what was the proper way to stay in compliance with those activities. And from that committee, they recommended to the board, and the board approved the process to do the annual adequate share process and continue on with the loan agreement. Subsequent to that, accounting rules changed that caused Aquit to have to reclassify some of the loans it had been participating in from loans to actual adequate share payments for the Aquit share. It didn't affect the contribution or the loan amounts or the adequate utilizations for the other parties, but it did for Aquit because of the nature of the Aquit and the city, the way they are related to each other. So the loan amount is for the non-Oklahoma City, non-Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust participant shares to the degree that we do not have the credit of sales. So like when we have the credit of sales for Atoka County for the rural water sales for the rural water district at Atoka, and when we sell water up the Atoka pipeline for the Pot County rural water district, for the Cedar Valley sales, for the rock quarry, we share the sales of those for the water supply portion of those revenues as credits to this amount.
Any questions?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the loan agreement under item 4H. Hearing no further questions, voting please. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Item H is approved. Item I is the audit contract with BKD for audit services for fiscal year 14. Pretty well speaks for itself.
Make a motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve item 4I. Are there any questions or comments? Voting please. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I is approved. J is amendment to the contract, amendment number 1 to the contract for engineering services concerning repairs, inspections, and so forth at the headquarters building. It's an existing contract, and we are amending it.
Yeah, and we could have Larry here from our engineering group talk about that if you'd like for us to talk about that.
Yes, you're probably...
Larry, if you could come and talk to us about Amendment 1 for the contract for WMC 018.
Certainly. My name is Larry Hare. I'm the design manager for the department. In the last couple of meetings from MCA, we had contracted with Tim Johnson and Associates to take a look at and assess some of the items for McGee Creek, one being the balancing tank or the regulating tank cathodic protection and the damage to the roof due to an overflow of the tank. We also, as a part of extra work regarding that contract, we had him take a look at what it would take to install an isolation valve on either side of that tank so that personnel won't have to go drain the tank and put in flanges inside the tank in order to keep the tank isolated from the rest of the system while work was being done on it. That way, with the valve, they could just go on either side of the tank, close the valve, and isolate the tank without having to actually go into it. Another project we have is the floor at the headquarters building for the McGee Creek headquarters building. And we had the consultant also take a look at some of the damage that was due to age of the structure, such as the outside siding, windows, and other things of that nature, to bring it up to a little more current standards, because you're losing a lot of heat in the wintertime, a lot of coolness in the summertime. So it'll help refurbish that building a little better than just fixing the floor foundation problems. I'm looking here, let's see. The hydroelectric generator, we're looking to either repair it or replace it. Right now it's non-repairable. We're looking at a replacement generator. Added to that course of work is also some drainage improvements around that structure so that there'll be less erosion that happens around that structure there at the bottom of the dam.
Any questions? Thank you. We have a motion on the amendment?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the amendment under item 4J. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? J is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
K is the selection of the bank. Again, this is an annual exercise we go through, and these are the same three financial institutions we've used in the past, are they not?
Yes.
They are, and would you like us to explain why we use them? That would be, so under our bond indenture, we have to appoint a trustee bank to handle the monthly transfers of funds so we can then pay for the semi-annual principal and interest payments on the revenue bonds. The trustees selected bank first to be the trustee bank for that activity, and they perform that activity on a regular basis. They work with staff where we do our monthly transfers on those things, and then they pay the actual bondholders their principal and interest payments when those are due. AmeriState Bank for many years has been what we call the operating fund in the indenture. We have an operating fund, and so when we make payments to the vendors for claims due, those come from the AmeriState Bank operating fund. J.P. Morgan Chase used to be, many years ago, the trustee bank when it was Liberty Bank before it got bought out, before the trustees decided to move to Bank First. J.P. Morgan also is an operating fund for the City of Oklahoma City and the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust, and they have automation capabilities to do auto pay for payroll. And so we have a fund there, a sweep fund there, just to be able to do auto pay for employee automatic payments for their payroll. And so that's what that's used for. We are working with Ameristate to see if they can change their technologies so they could do that. It hasn't happened yet, but we're anticipating that sometime in the future that could occur.
Well,
Any more comments or questions under 4K?
make a motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve item 4K. Further comments or questions? Voting, please. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4K is approved. Next item is an information item. It's a wage and benefit survey that's included with the packet. It's really here for information although, Brett, why don't you talk a little bit about it in terms of how the survey came?
Okay. Susan McCormick from our office, management specialist, her and her staff conduct the survey, and she can provide a briefing for us.
So we conduct this survey every other year to be sure that our wages and benefits are in line with the other Bureau of Reclamation projects in the Oklahoma area. So in doing that this year, we found that we were a little bit below in some areas, and that's why we proposed the 3% increase.
How much percent?
3%. And on the back of your item, if you're interested, there's a history of the pay plan adjustments that we've made throughout the years since 1990 when we created the pay plan.
Susan's been doing this for many years and has a lot of experience in personnel matters, and they were very careful to make sure they're doing an apples-to-apples comparison from place to place of the various facilities, and we also even compare them to area salaries in the area too.
Any questions?
Move to
Just good
approve.
information to have.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I jumped the gun on you.
Oh. It's just good information for us to have to make sure that we're not below what we need to be to pay fair amount for what we get. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we need a motion to receive the report.
I move to receive the report.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to receive the report. Voting, please. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Report's received. The next item is 4M. It's audited annual financial report and communications regarding the audit from the McGee Creek Authority for the year ended 6/30/13. It is also in your file, and I believe that there were no findings of any significance at all in their audit.
Correct.
Again, it's a pretty standard audit that government entities use, and they will point out to us if there's things they think we need to look at, and they did not point anything out specifically.
Make a motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve the report? Second. Have a motion and a second to receive the report. Are there questions or comments? Voting, please. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next item is ratification of the payments from September 13th through March 18th, September 13th of 2013 through March 18th, 2014. Again, this is a normal way we do it in order to operate. We make the payments if they're within the policy, and then we ratify them at the semi-annual meetings. So there's nothing unusual, I don't believe, in that at all. Have a motion?
Second.
And a second? Do you have a motion and a second? Voting, please. What?
You made the motion.
Oh, okay. We have a motion and a second to ratify the payments. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Payments are ratified. Next item is whether or not to enter into executive session. I assume we probably do need to. You want to strike it?
We don't have anything to...
Okay. Well, we can talk about it generally. I think all of us, from one position or another, are concerned about a resolution of a long-term matter. I mean, It's an impediment not just to our progress, but it's an impediment to the whole state's progress in turning to make a statewide water policy. So we feel good that the thing is moving. In fact, we're in mediation with regard to this matter today. That's why the city manager's not here today, and that's why Marcia's not here today. The general manager of the trust, they're participating in a mediation in an effort to try to resolve this. So hopefully within the next few months, we will have a resolution and we can start to move forward with our own plans. But I think even more important is that this is a lawsuit that's got to be taken care of in order for there to be a statewide effective planned water distribution. It's just going to have to happen at some point in time. There's so many issues out there, people suing one another, and we need to come together and start trying to work it out in a better way than this. So hopefully that's the track we're headed on. The next item is items from trustees. Are there comments from, well, I guess we do need a motion to strike. We have a motion to strike this matter, so it.
Make a motion to strike.
And a second? Second. Have a motion and a second, strike item O. Voting, please. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item O is stricken. Next item, item 5, is items from trustees. One of the trustees want to make a comment? Hearing none, we'll move on to the general manager's report. There are 3 reports. They are included in your in the packet. They have the first one is operations and lake level and pumpage report. Again, these are provided at each meeting, and actually they're available if any of the trustees or anyone wanted to know about them. They're available as the time we compile it on a monthly basis. So if anybody that wanted to know about it could contact Marcia's office, Ms. Slaughter's office, and we could provide the information on an interim basis also. Are there specific comments from the general manager's office that you want to?
The item Roman numeral 6C, we have Matt Warren and Nick Garman from the Bureau of Reclamation that are here to make a presentation on that item if you're ready to receive the first 2.
I think we are. Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting us here today. I apologize a little bit for my voice, my throat. I think the allergies are getting to me a little bit. But Nick Garman here and myself, Matt Warren, we work for the Bureau of Reclamation here in Oklahoma City. And if you'll allow me to, I'll just give you guys just a quick background of who Reclamation is and what we do before I get into a little bit more specific information about McGee Creek Reservoir and the project there. So Reclamation, we're a federal agency, part of the Department of Interior, and we were established in 1902 to reclaim the arid West by providing water and power for irrigation and drinking water supplies. Our mission is to manage, develop, and protect water-related resources in an environmentally and economically sound manner in the interest of the American public. And then some of our more well-known facilities are Hoover Dam and Grand Coulee Dam. We've built about 600 reservoirs in the 17 western states. And then the Oklahoma, Texas area office, which is the office I work for and Nick works for, we have oversight responsibility for 11 dams in Oklahoma, in Texas, and in southern Kansas. And 7 reservoirs in Oklahoma, one of those being McGee Creek Reservoir. So just a general overview of kind of how a reclamation project is formed. We have a local entity that will identify a need for water and then submit a report to Congress or get a congressional sponsor. And then Congress will authorize Reclamation, in our case, to study that reservoir site and the potential to build a reservoir. And then we complete that report, submit it to Congress, and then if Congress authorizes that project, we'll enter into repayment contracts and O&M contracts with the local sponsor, in this case the McGee Creek Authority, for repayment of the construction and repayment of the O&M. And then we'll go out and build the facility, construct the facility and the delivery systems. And then Also, in our case, McGee Creek Authority is the entity that's responsible for the day-to-day operation and maintenance of the dam. We don't have any day-to-day on-site presence at the facility. We do inspections and regulations, things like that, to make sure that the project is operated as designed. So to get a little more into the purpose of why we're here today is talk about the what we call firm yield or reservoir yield for McGee Creek project. Reclamation defines firm yield as the amount of water that can be withdrawn from the reservoir every year, including the worst droughts of record, and have that reservoir never actually be empty. So in other words, it's the amount of water that you can take out even during that worst drought of record, which we've got about 100 years of historical data that we've looked at to determine what's that maximum amount that we pulled out and have the reservoir never completely dry. And go back to the one. And so this model itself, it's actually just kind of an accounting spreadsheet. We're looking at inflows and outflows, and then the reservoir storage itself. So it's really just just mass balance or accounting of that. It's just a lot of data on a monthly time step to deal with. We use a future estimated sediment condition. In other words, if we say we're talking about a 100-year yield, it means that after 100 years of sediment has accumulated in the reservoir will still provide this amount of water. So that's the number that we deal with is a future sediment estimated condition. Okay, go ahead. So the original firm yield for McGee Creek project, McGee Creek Dam, was established in our definite planning report, which is what was provided to Congress to authorize the project. And it's based on the historic rainfall data, stream gauge data, evaporation records, the sediment estimates that were made at the time, and then the reservoir storage and capacity allocations and how much water will fit in that bucket or in that reservoir, and then the monthly demands for the water. And then in 2013, we performed an update just to kind of check or verify that those numbers that were performed back in 1978 were still accurate or still, if there was any better data. And so we made some adjustments based on additional years of data that we had. We've had about 30 years of operational data that we've been able to use and to verify. In most cases, we are able to check or verify that sediment condition, make sure we made accurate assumptions for that. In the case of the McGee Creek project, the sedimentation rate was assumed to be very low. Reclamation has not actually performed an updated sediment survey. Due to that, and we haven't seen a lot of signs of sediment accumulation just because it is such a rocky reservoir and got a good foundation. We have, like I mentioned, we have the additional data from after the reservoir was constructed, which helps us provide just a check to make sure that the data is accurate and what engineers originally assumed back in 1978 were good assumptions. And then we also had climate change considerations that we added into our modeling efforts this time around, just to give us a range of variability or what might be expected to be seen. I'll get into that just a little bit. This is a lot of things going on in this particular slide, but this is a screenshot of that operational model. And if you pay attention to the graph, the blue and red graph there up on top first, on the left side, that's reservoir storage in acre feet. And on the bottom, we have years of data. And what we do is we model that reservoir again, assuming that we take out that firm yield deliverable amount every year, and we find out where the absolute minimum reservoir elevation is. That's our drought of record. And you can see that occurred back in 1966 in this case. And so that just shows what the reservoir would have looked like had it been operating, where you pull out that firm yield amount every year. And then the red information up there at the top, that's spills or releases through the outlet works. Real briefly, one thing that we're able to do with this model is it gives us the ability to kind of perform some what-if scenarios or look at different conditions. If we looked at importing water into that reservoir, how would that affect the yield? Or if we changed the pool levels, maybe the conservation pool larger or smaller, how would that affect it? Or if we put in demand-based triggers where, if the reservoir gets so low, you reduce to a certain percentage. And so it gives us some flexibility to make operational decisions, and hopefully in the interest of all the parties involved. And we've done that with several other reservoirs and been pretty useful information if you guys are ever interested in that in the future. Go ahead. So the firm yield results, the original definite planning report reported the 100-year sediment-adjusted firm yield is 71,800 acre-feet per year. And that quantity does not take into consideration the 11 cubic feet per second release that's required for environmental, it was planned to maintain the aquatic life and water quality downstream of the McGee Creek Dam. That 11 CFS release is almost 8,000 acre-feet per year. So if you take that 71,800, take out that environmental release, you're left with about 63,840 or 63,800 acre-feet per year that's available for permitting. When we looked at this information again in 2013, updated it, came out with very similar numbers. 64,800 acre-feet per year was that number if you take out the 11 CFS, or 72,800. So they're very similar to what we had originally. And then just listed there are the water rights out of McGee Creek Reservoir. And if you'll notice, the 60,000 acre-foot per year permitted water rights versus the 63,000 or 64,800 acre-feet that's available, or that we're calling as the firm yield. And like I mentioned, as part of this effort, we looked at climate change considerations. We worked with our technical experts in our service center up in Denver. We've got some climate change experts up there. So what they did is took a look at our kind of regionally for Oklahoma, our 7 reservoirs, what we could consider as bounds for this for climate change considerations. And what are the possible bounds? And basically what they did is it had almost 100 different models that are out there that, and they kind of used all those models to come up with basically 4 basic tendencies. Some of these models, when you run through them, these climate change models, they predict a drier and hotter climate. And some of them are a wetter and cooler, or a drier and cooler. So those are the 4 different tendencies of these models, or predictions of these models. And then we also had them develop a central tendency, which is basically an average of what all those models predict. And so if we look at that, if we look at those yield numbers, after we adjust for that 11 CFS downstream environmental release, the drier, more warming scenario, which makes sense that it would produce a lower yield, it was around 54,000 acre-feet per year. And then the wetter, less warming scenario produced the highest yield, up at around 70,100 acre-feet per year. And that compares to the 64,800 number that we had. And that central tendency scenario produced a number of 66,000, which again is very similar to our model when we just look at the data on record. And so take from that what you will, but that central tendency is pretty similar to what we were already looking at. Okay. So reclamation establishes a firm yield number for the reservoir, and the state of Oklahoma Water Resources Board is responsible for issuing permits for that yield amount, and then issued them to the McGee Creek Authority in this case. In the issuance of additional surface water permits out of that reservoir, above that firm yield number is going to necessitate an inability to deliver water, to deliver that full firm yield amount. And it's pretty much a one-to-one scenario. If you over-allocate that basin by 100 acre-foot per year, then you lose that much water out of your yield amount. So that's just something good to, I guess, be aware of or know about, in case scenarios arise. And then also the storage quantity that is required to deliver the project firm yield is greater than the yield itself, just because of evaporation losses and things like that. And McGee Creek, it's a pretty wet area, a lot of rainfall. It's not quite as extreme as some of these western Oklahoma reservoirs. We've got Foss Reservoir in western Oklahoma. It's also a reclamation reservoir. And the storage in that reservoir is about 120,000 acre feet, and the yield is about 20,000. So we're talking about a 1 to 5, 1 to 6 ratio of reservoir storage versus the yield. And so that's all I have for you today. If you've got any questions for me, I've got some contact information on there if that's useful.
Well, let me ask you, if you go back a couple of slides to the one that says McGee Creek firm yield results. That's a couple of 3 back, 4 maybe back. The original estimates when the lake was constructed, or when the planning process, was that it would be able to produce this 60,000 acre feet per year.
63,800.
Yeah, on a firm basis.
Yeah.
And that has not changed since, from what, 73 to now? That's pretty much still the same?
That's correct. And again, it's based off of that driest period of record, which was in 1966. So our additional years of data, we haven't had a new drought of record.
Right. So based on the rainfall, heat and all the things that go factor into that, the predictions that were made in 1973 with regard to the firm yield we're still within that, right?
That's right.
Correct?
Yeah, our updates were very.
How much are we using of that? There's 60,000 acre feet of water that's allocated to the combination of the 4 entities that own water there. How much of that are we actually using now?
I'm not sure of that number off the top of my head.
Well, our staff might know.
Yeah, Larry Hare puts those records together, and may be able to pull that together from the earlier report.
Unfortunately, you have me at a disadvantage because I don't have that record in front of me. I don't have it remembered at the top of my head.
So would you estimate we're using 90%? I mean, this, obviously, your disclaimer has been...
There is a set schedule that we had to be using a certain percentage every 5 or 10 years to realize all of our rights, or we would lose them according to OWRB rules. I think we have met that requirement one time during the last 5 years. I don't think this is it. No, that's what I need is the past
Say that
records.
again.
So I can get that answer to you.
No, well, just repeat what you just said about the requirement, and we've met it one time. What does that mean?
When the lake was being developed and we were entering into contract with the BOR and the state to determine what our water rights would be, there was a set schedule of a percentage that we needed to use by a certain date in order to fully realize our rights. So
we're not using all the water that we have available there. Is that right or not right?
we have used that one time that I know of in the past 5 years. And that we're still on schedule with our rates.
Is that because of the lower amount of water that Oklahoma City pulled under its acre feet allocation, or the lack of pulling water from the other 3? I know Soda doesn't pull any water.
There are times where like say the North Canadian River system can fully supply the system or the city without having to pull so much from the southeast region. It was during this past drought area where we were pulling all of our resources.
Right.
And I think during that period is when we were pulling more from McGee Creek, Atoka area, as well as trying to use all of our resources from the North Canadian River area.
It wouldn't surprise me that when we did the pipeline and shut the pipeline down, that when we turned the water back on, we're starting to use more because we had to refill Draper. I mean, Draper was virtually empty.
That is correct.
So that would be a time when we'd use a larger amount.
And when we were refilling Draper at that time, the drought had hit us, had begun. So we were hit with a double whammy on that project. We were refilling the lake due to the drought and to the pump station rehab project.
But there's no additional water in McGee Creek that could be allocated based on what you're saying, the allocation of 60,000 acre feet. It's only, what, 3,000? 3,800. Yeah, it's 95% of allocated.
If you go to the next slide, and keep in mind that there's City of Atoka 8,000, Atoka County 8,000, Oklahoma City 40,000. When you go to the next slide, they have the third bullet there that talks about the range of wet to dry in central is coming up with, I don't see this report telling us what the drought yield, reliable 98% drought yield number should be today based on the study. Okay, so do you have it was 63,800 at one time, and 3,800 acre feet of water had not been allocated by the Oklahoma Water Resources Board as unallocated. So based on your study, are you proposing that we leave it at the current yield that it originally was for the reservoir, or are you proposing we change it?
Yeah, Reclamation would propose that you leave the yield where it was.
Okay.
Those numbers are pretty similar, pretty close to where
Okay.
The state recognizes our original firm yield number. Probably not a lot of reason to go and change it, but it does leave that little bit of water on the table still.
Well, this is getting into the weeds just a little bit, but maybe this might be something for Larry to talk a little bit more about. But the McGee Creek Authority is the aliquot share payments are based upon our share of the water rights that are appropriated by the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, but the McGee Creek Authority itself, separate from its members, purchased the water storage rights in the reservoir. Okay? So the water storage rights are what McGee Creek Authority manages, not the water use. So a lot of times, we have to separate in our mind our roles as city officials or trust officials, is that the cities have the water appropriative rights to use the water, the consuming of the water, but the storage right, the actual right to put water in the bucket and reserve that water for whenever you need to use it, we're only dealing with the storage itself as the McGee Creek Authority. So the staff for the McGee Creek Authority has been assigned the responsibility by the trust itself to go out and market the water for the portion of water that's not used. But when we do those contracts, it's never really ever sold by the McGee Creek Authority. The McGee Creek Authority has no right to sell any water because the water is actually sold by the individual entities that hold the appropriative rights by the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. Okay? So there's always been a lack of understanding about that issue that has to be cleared up because the McGee Creek Authority never has ever sold any water. Okay? It has only impounded the water in the storage bucket that was built by the federal government, and then we bought that storage right away when we defeased the debt to the federal government and issued the revenue bonds. So that's the conundrum we have of that. So people always get confused, and even when we've had conversations with BOR about we are selling water. No, we never have ever sold water. The McGee Creek Authority has no right to sell any water. Okay? And never has ever sold any water. only the members have. And so those contracts we approve for sales are because the members, the beneficiaries, have told us to sell the water on their behalf. But it's always their water. That's why we use the revenues as a credit to their aliquot share payments. Another interesting point is that when you look at the members that are actually at the meeting today, Oklahoma City, City of Atoka, County of Atoka, when you add all the water rights that we've been appropriated, it's 56,000 acre-feet. The worst case scenario that the BOR has looked at is 54,000 acre-feet. So we'd only have a difference of 2,000 acre-feet, which is only 3.5% reduction in our shares in the worst case scenario compared to what we actually have appropriated. So it's actually a pretty, interesting but good comparison there to know that we could do 96.5% of what our appropriative rights are in the worst case scenario they've analyzed. Now, the other part is that, we have to build the second Atoka pipeline before we could ever get Oklahoma City's share from southeastern Oklahoma to Draper. We can't get the full rights we have in Atoka plus McGee Creek to Oklahoma City right now because we have to build that second pipeline to make that possible. But we can move the water from McGee Creek to Atoka, and so because for the benefit of the residents in southeastern Oklahoma, we try to do lake level management between the two reservoirs so that we can move water between the two reservoirs to keep the water level at a reasonable level in both reservoirs.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, both of you. Thank you. Are there citizens to be heard? Hearing none, we need a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Voting, please. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We stand adjourned. The next meeting